Hello and welcome to another Caseware webinar. Today we'll be looking into common tagging errors within iXBRL. This is the final part of a three-part iXBRL webinar series. If you've not seen any of the other parts, they are available on our YouTube channel, and I believe they're also published to our KB website. My name's James, and I'll be hosting the webinar today alongside the fantastically fabulous Phil, who will be presenting today. He's one of our education and media consultants, so we're in safe hands for today's webinar. We'll also be running a live Q&A session at the end of the webinar, in addition to answering your questions if they're applicable at that point in time, halfway through the webinar. We'll also, if you have any questions, do use the Q&A button, which will just be shown on screen there. And if you have any technical issues in regards to the stream itself, please use the chat feature. Perfect. A recording of today's session will be made available on both our knowledge base and YouTube channel, in which we would encourage you to subscribe. And now I'm just going to hand over to Phil, who's going to run through the agenda for today.
Yes, thank you, James. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. As James has already mentioned, this is the third part of our iXBRL series. So if you did miss anything on, or if you want to catch up on any of the other webinars that we've done, then please feel free to jump into the YouTube channel and have a look. The recordings are always available on there, as will this one within the next few days. So yeah, today's agenda, we'll be looking at errors relating to auto-tagged content. There are some examples there of subsidiary undertakings, but generally what we're going to focus on is errors that can occur as a result of not selecting the right options within the wizard or within the accounts themselves, or selecting options that you shouldn't be selecting. And then we're going to have a look at errors that can occur as a result of manual tagging. They are the main type of rounding errors that you can get within the Caseware software. So if anyone's has any specific examples or questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. But we are going to go through the most common ones that we've come across as part of our support team, or within our support team, those questions that we get emails on and messages on and phone calls on, and how you can alleviate those issues and things to look out for. Because as you can tell by the name of the webinar, they are common, which means they do come up quite often. Sorry, types of errors that we're going to be looking at: taxonomy conflicts. So this can be the result of us selecting the wrong taxonomy as and when we go through and we initially tag the account. Account status errors. So this could be in relation to not selecting the right options within the wizard, or it could be from not select or selecting options within the accounts that we shouldn't be selecting. And then obviously looking at specific tagging warnings and errors. And we're going to give you plenty of examples during today's webinar of those common tagging errors that you can see. So to start with, just pause my screen for a second and I will jump into a file which should be loading on your screen now.
Yep, all good there.
Okay, excellent. I've asked if anyone does have any questions that relate in certain sections, please jump in at that point. My colleague James will jump in and tell me to, or give me the question, and hopefully I'll be able to answer it for you. Now, this is just a standard set of financial statements. We can see areas that have been tagged, as we saw in the first webinar, via the review function here, but we're focusing specifically on the tagging errors. So again, if anyone wants an overview of the toolbar at the top, please let us know. And again, we can drop that in the chat function. During the process of generating the iXBRL, there are three areas where Caseware runs various diagnostics to make sure that the right tags are being included, or what Caseware perceives to be the right tags are being included in each. So firstly, based on the taxonomy, then based on the context and the numerics that we select when we tag items manually, and then to make sure that there are no tags missing when we go through and generate. And we got a fact against each of those tags, because ultimately that's what the tags are generated from, or the majority of the tags are generated from the software. And what we're trying to make sure is that we got a fact to go with those. So when we generate the iXBRL, the first diagnostics that you get and the first common error that you can receive will just be when we're selecting the type of export that we're doing. So when we load this up, and again, if anyone, I won't go through this in too much detail with regards to the options that is available in our first part of this webinar series. But if we're selecting company's house, the first diagnostics takes place here. So you get critical warnings, which are the ones with the red circles and the white crosses. And they are to indicate that this is a critical warning and that we can't continue because of that. And you can see on the screen a couple of examples of those. So the option to file the accounts with regulatory bodies must be selected before these accounts can be filed with company's house. And also the accounts must be finalized before they can be filed. So this is all about making sure that we complete the completion section of the wizard prior to trying to submit to company's house, especially. HMRC, you will get the option here. These are diagnostic warnings only. We can check the box to proceed. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't get error messages as and when we go past this point. So one thing always to check and make sure that you do is just close out. If you do see that on your company's house filing submission, make sure that once you load this in, go into the wizard, go to the completion section of the wizard, and just make sure you complete this section. So making sure that we select final accounts, that will finalize them. Will also give us the options down here to include the printed signature, the signatories, and also the signature dates, the dates that the accounts were signed. So I can say we'll go 31 of the 3rd, 22, 31 of 3rd, 22, just for argument's sake, that will do. And also for those filing with company's house, you want to make sure that you've selected to file with regulatory bodies. If you don't select that, then again, you'll get that warning message that we saw when we selected on the company's house filing. So if you are select that as well, that will remove some of the shading from the headers and the lines from the headers that need to be, or if we click on that, you'll see the option. So notes, headers and cover shading will be removed from the filing just so that can be submitted. Not required if you are filing with HMRC. Now, the reason why, the other thing that it will do, if you do have company's house filing and you do select that option, when we scroll down, it will turn off the detailed profit and loss account automatically. So it will hide this from the submission. Obviously, detailed profit and loss account does not need to be submitted to company's house. One thing to make sure, and as we mentioned in the first part of this webinar series, make sure that you do select the right taxonomy as and when you're selecting the options here. When I'm referring to company's house, I'm talking specifically about UK as well. Obviously, Irish revenue, detailed profit and loss can be included. 2021 UK FRS 102 with DPL for if you are including the DPL. 2021 UK FRS 102 if you are not including the DPL. Again, you will get a message when you run through the iXBRL process if you do include it. So if I go to generate iXBRL, if we've included the DPL but we haven't selected the DPL taxonomy, then when we click on here, CASA will give us a diagnostics message just to say that the DPL version of the UK FRS 102 taxonomy has been selected. Therefore, no DPL tags will be exported. So if you need them, it's just prompting you to go back in and change the taxonomy to the right option. When we go to company's house, you can see now that I still haven't selected filing regulatory bodies, so I'd need to go back in and check that. Just for this point, I'm going to mark to say we haven't got dates because I want to, again, show you as many different diagnostic errors that you can see. So in a lot of cases, people will go into the wizard and complete that first section to say, okay, we got final accounts. We're filing with regulatory bodies. That will get us past that first diagnostic message. So if we generate the iXBRL, we go to HMRC, or it will get us past that first message. Again, ideally, I'd select the detailed profit and loss version because I've got the detailed profit and loss included, but it's make too much difference for today's webinar. When we go to forward, we then obviously select the location of the DPL. So we're going to save this into HMRC, give it the file name HMRC, and then we can go through and we can export this. So when we export it, it will run through a secondary diagnostics, which we're going to see in the second part of this webinar when we jump into a different file. But it does take a moment to generate the iXBRL. So just things to look out for as and when you're going through and filing the financial statements, or as we've already seen, you may find that you've when you're manually tagging, as we're going to see later on, that you tag things incorrectly. That's when this message appears here. So we're going to see this in a bit more detail later on, and I'll show you examples. But at the moment, we've only got warning messages and information icons, so we can export this. Again, we'll focus more on that iXBRL diagnostics window in a moment when we jump into our other file. But yeah, things to look out for in terms of if you haven't got that manual tagging in the file, it's mainly about ensuring that you've completed the completion section of the wizard. Again, certain pieces of information as and when you go through caseware require information to be included in them. So for example, the director's report requires that signature date to be included. Otherwise, it's a blank cell, and because we don't select to export blank cells, it's just going to go, no, well, I'm going to exclude that as and when I go through and generate this iXBRL. Again, this process on my laptop takes a few moments. Laptop's running quite warm today, as I'm sure you guys can imagine. It's about 30 degrees, I think, outside at the moment. So just give it a minute to run through, and hopefully what we should see once this runs through is that there's a number of different red warning messages. So we've got past the first diagnostics that has gone, okay, so you've done the right things within the completion section for this to go through with HMRC. We've gone for that second diagnostics. So there's no incorrect contexts and incorrect numerics that we've assigned. And we've got to this final section, and we've got error messages. So date authorization, financial statement for issue, date signing director's report. So these are all to do with dates. And it's essentially because we've gone through and we haven't put those dates into the, we haven't put the dates into the completion section. So again, this is another warning, but you can see it will prevent us from filing this set of accounts with the electronic filing gateway. Now, below that, you've got a number of different compulsory tags that are included: entity trading status, legal form entity, start date for the period covered by the report. I've gone through and I've shown you these just on the screen, but these can often appear as red warnings as well for those of you that potentially tick this option at the bottom of the accounts. So please note that this option here, so at the bottom of the accounts, you can often get a blank page, and that blank page can obviously cause numbering issues if you're going through and printing the set of financial statements. So you can tick this box to skip this table. And obviously the benefits of doing that are that you obviously remove that blank page, but this must always be unticked when exporting for iXBRL purposes. So if you do find that you get those warnings, and I'll show you what they are, I'll tick this and just give you an example of what to look out for. I won't go and file them again after that, but if I go back into the wizard, we also want to make sure that we do put in those printed dates. So you can't file them until you've got the dates that they've been signed and approved by the board, and obviously in the case of the accountant's report, also the accountant's report date. When we generate the iXBRL now, we'll just quickly run through the same process. HMRC, tick the box. HMRC, I'll give it the same name. When you're generating the cloud document, that instance document that we've just gone through and created, just to be aware, there is that main difference between where you're saving the HTML file that gets created. If you're doing it to HMRC, the HTML file will save into the location that you select in that process. If you're doing it to company's house, it saves it into the same file path as the caseware file. So that would then allow you to go and use the CH button at the top, which obviously allows you to directly publish submit the accounts to company's house through the caseware software. And again, if anyone wants an overview of that CH button, please feel free to drop something in the chat feature. And we've got a getting started guide that highlights how to use that company's house filing option. But yeah, we'll just give this a minute, verifying the iXBRL. Again, this is the last time you'll have to see this screen for today, because I won't go through and export when we're looking at the general manual tagging instances. Okay. There we go. Okay, so in this instance, you can see if I just go down, we've got the date authorization, financial statement for issue, which was our error that we had originally, the date signed in the director's report. Now, because we put that information into the wizard, we no longer have an error message in relation to that. But what we do get is all these red warning messages, start date for period covered by report, which just happens to be the same as this one here. Entity dormant, entity is dormant, not dormant. Entity trading status, the account status, the trading status up here. So all of these error messages relate to this section at the bottom. So again, just to reiterate, making sure that you untick this box as and when you go through and submit your financial statements.
Hi, Phil. We've had a question come in that's in some cases when we're entering, when we've entered the date, we're still unable to get the correct information and showing the same error, which is being generated by you now. So it sounds like this client, when they enter the date, they still get the same error.
Okay. I would always double check. So if you go into the director's report or the balance sheet and look at the dates, firstly, just make sure that the date is being included in there. Obviously, if you've gone through and you've edited the text at all, which we don't recommend you do, but some users do it, and that cell is no longer there, then, or that figure is not put, or the date is not pulling through into that cell, then it can cause that error message. The best way to check it is go to iXBRL and run a review, because it should highlight on that cell, or you can go to tools and you can go to iXBRL and you can go to review, click OK, and it will highlight. So if I just wait for this to load through on my set of accounts, I will be able to highlight the tag that's been assigned to any of these areas. So we can always double check. It'll always be the date here. So if I hover over that and I see date of signing the director's report, active period, end date, then I know that should be tagged, and that is tagged correctly because it's just a standard version. So double check, run the review, and make sure that the dates are being included correctly.
No problem. And say if I were this client and you know, I'd had this issue and then I'd taken the latest EPAC on this file, made sure it was installed. How do I ensure that, you know, this file has taken any updates to any of the tags that might have happened in, say, if I hadn't taken an update for a year, for example?
Yeah, good point as well. Yeah, from James. When you guys go through and if you do apply any EPACs onto files, when you apply any EPACs onto your templates, it's always important to be aware that that'll update the template and not your individual files. So the minute that I go through and put those dates into the completion section of the wizard, you get this little lock icon on the right-hand side. That means that this client file is locked from knowledge library updates. So those updates that Caseware pushes through you don't get that message that pops up on the wizard and the accounts, the one that I'm sure we're all accustomed to and have seen thousands of times. That message doesn't appear because the accounts are locked. So if it is the case you've taken updates, it may be that you need to take those updates on your balance sheet. Now, obviously, if you do take any updates, we suggest that you take a backup of the file first, but just go back into that completion section of the wizard double check the dates, take a screenshot of them if you want to, run a remove and not remove and replace, sorry, go to tools, although remove and replace will update the file as well. Go to KL updates and just take the updates on those notes. So just the signature section within the director's report and also the balance sheet, and that will fix the issue.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, that goes for any other update, I take it, you know.
Yeah, so always just again, there are instances where you don't necessarily need to take the update for the tagging to go through. But if you do get error messages, the first thing, and you called our support team, the first thing they'd always tell you to do is make sure that you take the updates on the files, because it might be that mandatory tags are missing because that have been introduced as a result of an update.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Phil.
That's right. Excellent. Okay, so jumping out of that file, we're now going to have a look at some manual tagging errors, or examples of manual tagging errors. So I'll show them to you on your screen. I won't go through and read them all. I'm sure you guys are more than capable of having a look through those. But we're going to look. These are errors that result or that come as a result of manual tagging that you've applied to areas such as, could be accounting policies, could be cells within the accounts, it could be the standard sections that we're going to look at with regard to related party and controlling party notes. So where you've got in these areas, and again, if anyone's unsure of what we need to do in relation to tagging these areas, please go back and have a look at our second part of this webinar series, because we focus on what needs to be tagged and give examples and whatnot. But because these areas are manually tagged, it's a lot more common than what we've just seen. The examples of putting the dates, not putting the dates in, and getting those errors is common, but this is a lot more common because it's something that Caseware can't control. We can prompt you to go into the wizard, but we can't tell you to tag certain areas. We can give you, like you've got the message at the top of the screen regarding the controlling party note. So you can go through if you want to, and you can or you can go through if you want to, and you can choose to say that you've tagged the controlling party note, but Caseware won't check that in a lot of cases, but it will check it if you go through and apply the tag. So it will make sure that the tags that you do apply to it are correct. So that'll be an instance where maybe Caseware won't, for example, related party transactions, Caseware won't necessarily go, oh, you haven't tagged this, but HMRC or Companies House or wherever it's being filed to will go, hold on, you've got this information, we need to know about this information. So manual tagging is something that you need to be aware of, and making sure that we select the right context and the right numerics as and when we apply those tags, so that they go through and everything's available where it needs to be. So when we go into the tagged accounts, this is a separate file. We've got the right taxonomy for a DPL that we want to publish, and we're going to go down to related party and controlling party. So those errors that we saw on the first screen, we're going to go through and just talk about clearing those, because again, they are common. So we can go to generate iXBRL. And on here, we're just going to select HMRC. You can see we've passed the diagnostics. We've got all the dates that we need within this file already. We can go to specify location, and we're going to go HMRC again. And we are going to export that. When you're and again, just regarding that naming, it's up to you what you name the export HTML. Just name of the company, year-end date will be sufficient, but it's up to you. We'll just wait for that to run through that initial diagnostics, and hopefully what we should see is a number of different, there we go, error messages that have appeared. So these are all the same as the error messages that we saw on the previous screen, just to show you that, if I bring this one back up. So we got items of measures, items representing information, they're all exactly the same. We'll just work through each one, and I'll talk about how you can avoid the error message and what you should do if you do receive this error message. So the first one, item representing information over a period, is using a context associated with a specific date. So those of you that saw the second part of this webinar series you will have heard that we were talking about ensuring that tags meet the appropriate period of time that we're reporting on. So for example, the balance sheet is referring to the end date of it, as I'm sure we're all aware. We've all seen a balance sheet before, but it's referring to a specific date in time. So when we're going through and we're manually tagging items within notes and text sections within the accounts, if it's referring to an item or a balance that is owed at an end date, or an amount that relates to the end of the period, we should always use the context that has the end date attached to it. So active period end date or prior period end date. If we're referring to an amount that took place over the entire period, so for example, the information relates to the profit and loss account, the turnover isn't just on a single day, it's over the period. So that would use just the active period context. So we're referring to the active period as a whole rather than just a certain date in time. And again, once you've got that, the distinguish or the difference between those two sorted when you're going through and manually tagging, then that should alleviate the majority of the errors that you get, because these two are the most common. Now, when you do get these errors, you can see we can't export. I can't export this information. I can't go any further than here because I need to go through and correct these error messages. So this issue prevents the generation of valid iXBRL document. So the red X messages are the critical errors. Again, we've got an informational icon here. And then we've got the eye icon for information at the bottom. Now, the red X itself, to correct it, we just go correct here. And this is referring to, and it will highlight with a red circle the item that this is referring to, and it'll open up the iXBRL document tagging window. Again, for anyone who's unsure of this screen, please have a look at our second part of the webinar series where we do talk about this in a bit more detail. Now, if we look at the sentence itself, it says during 2021, the company purchased £65,000 of IT services from, and then it's the name of the company. Now, the sentence quite clearly states is that during 2021, the company purchased £65,000 worth of IT services. So because we're referring to the entire period over that 2021 period, we purchased £65,000 worth of IT services. The context should be referring to the active period rather than the active period end date. So again, to make sure that if you're referring to the entire period, we want to change the context. So this should be entity controlled by key management personnel 1, RPT. Again, if you're looking for the right tags for the related party transactions, when you're searching, search for the RPT at the start. They are for related party transactions. Previously, as you can see, we were using active period end date. And in this instance, we should have been using active period. And again, that is for any tag that is referring to the entire period as a whole. So when we change this context to active period and we click OK, that red one should then only have 4 left. Once that loads through, give that a second to respond, click on the screen, and you can see we've only got 4 now. So if you're referring to the period, make sure it's active period. If you're referring to the end date, active period end date, or prior period end date for the prior year. Now, the next warning, item representing information at a specific date is used in context associated with a duration, is the complete opposite of what we just said. So for this example, if I go to correct, this is referring to, and actually let's close out of this and we'll make this slightly smaller so you can see the sentence. If I can pull this across, there we go, so we can see all of the message. So this particular balance, no amounts were outstanding at the end of the year, but in 2020, there was 10,000 outstanding. So straight away, we know from that statement that we're referring to the end of the period. So the context should be prior period end date rather than just prior period. It's quite an obvious example, but just to get the idea of how the tagging works, again, full period, active period, a specific end date, use the end date context. Once we click OK to that, then that will clear that second warning message. So they're quite easy to clear, quite straightforward. And the benefit of this is if you were to do this and you were to get those error messages that we saw just a minute ago because we've left the box ticked to the bottom of the accounts or we haven't put the dates in, we won't have to go back in and change these again. Caseware remembers when we go through and we change it within the documents tagging window, when we go through and change the context, it gets remembered, it gets saved into the specific tags. We haven't got to go through and change it every single time, or if we need to regenerate this at all. A unit of measure currency was not specified for monetary tag income from related party. So this is all about the numeric item. So we talked about the context just a minute ago. Now we're talking about the numeric item itself. So if I go to correct here, again, as we spoke about during the second part of this webinar series, it's important to make sure that we select not just the right context at the bottom of the screen here, not just the right tag, but also the right numeric item. So within the numerics, the two main ones that you use are no units of measure or reporting currency. So the reporting currency should be selected in any instance where you are referring to a value. Now, obviously, there is exceptions if you're referring to percentages, or if you're talking about shares and the shares are in a slightly different currency than the reporting currency, then you might use one of these alternative currency options at the bottom. But in 95% of cases, where we'll use the no units of measure or the reporting currency numeric. So for you guys, if you do find that you get an error message in relation to this, so just going back, just pull this out of the way. So a unit of measure in brackets currency was not specified for monetary tag. So it's a monetary tag, but we haven't got a unit of measure. So what we need to do is just change and update this numeric, and generally it'll be to update it to reporting currency. It's easy enough to do to not apply the right numeric, especially if you're going through and you're doing these in order. Because, for example, the name of the company, so Total IT Services Limited, wouldn't have a numeric item, but the balance would. So sometimes, again, you're going through, you're trying to do it quickly, and you forget to change that numeric, then the whole idea of diagnostics is just to prompt you to go, actually, maybe you need to double check this and make sure it's correct. So when we correct that, we can click OK. So now we've applied a unit of measure to that specific cell. Once that loads, it will clear that message. And the last ones we have are tagged items value does not meet the required length specified for this taxonomy element. So this is the last critical warning that we've got, and it's in relation to, and again, for those of you that watch the second part of this webinar series, you will have seen that we mentioned that when we're talking about tagging the country of incorporation within controlling party notes, the actual name of the company should always be outside of the cell. So the actual tag is just looking for a blank cell, because the context that we use is, or the context that we use when we tag the item is what defines it as being a country incorporated in the United Kingdom. So again, for those of you, if you haven't, or if you want a bit more information on controlling party note, then we'll drop that in the chat feature. We've also got an example of what needs to be tagged on this note on our knowledge base. But essentially, when we go through and we tag the United Kingdom as a country of incorporation, when we right click and we go, so we right click on the tag that we want, so country in which the parent of the smallest group is incorporated. So when it comes through to tagging this, find the right tag, right click and select new dimensional context. The reason why we locate the tag before right clicking is because the primary item and the hypercube which we use to apply the tags will be correct, because it's picking up from the existing tags or the existing tag that we've selected. Now, in this instance, all we would do is go to the country and region, and we would just locate UK in this list. So they're not in alphabetical order, unfortunately, but if we scroll down this list, we will find United Kingdom. We would select it, we'd click OK, and then we'd go through and create a tag. I've already done that. I did that in the Second part is webinar series, but again, any more information people want on that, let us know. But in terms of this, we can't resolve this issue because there's nothing wrong with the context. There's nothing wrong with the tag. It's just that there's information in the tag where there shouldn't be. So in this instance, we can't resolve this from this screen. We have to cancel that message. We then have to rectify the issue within the accounts. So we have to say United Kingdom should be on the outside of the cell. We then need to remove the text from within the cell. And the way to avoid ever having this issue is when you go through and create the cells for this section, when you're creating them, just make the cell a non-input cell. So if we just go back into enable editing or go into enable editing and we just right click and go to edit cell, just make sure you don't tick the input cell, and that won't tempt or prompt anyone to go through and type text into those cells. Because as we've already said, we need those to be blank cells for the tagging to work. Now, when we generate the iXBRL again, because I've cleared that information out of the cell, I didn't change the context. I didn't change the tag at all. I didn't even change the numeric. All I did was take that information out of the cell and put it separately. So now, when I go through and I generate that iXBRL instance document, it should take me or it should leave no red warning messages. And as you can see, we've just got informational cell text here. So the last one that we had on our list was this one: tagged information is non-numeric, however, a unit of measure has been assigned to it. Now, this isn't a critical warning, because if we leave it, as you can see, when you select it, the unit of measure will just be stripped out during the export. So in case we go, that shouldn't have a unit of measure, we can take that out. So it's the opposite to what we saw when we had the unit of measure, or if I just bring it back up on the screen. So it's just the opposite to this message that we had here. So the unit of measure currency was not specified for monetary tags. This is saying that we've got a monetary numeric on, so we've got currency attached to a cell that shouldn't have a currency attached to it. And obviously, because Caseware can take that out and just have it as no unit of measure, you can just go to export, or if you want to, you can go through and correct it, which will obviously fix it for the long term. If you do get any of those other error messages come through, you won't have to go through that process as a whole again. So we can change this to no unit of measure, click OK. And when we click OK, that will clear the warning messages completely. And we just leave, it just leaves us with these informational cells. We don't need to do anything with these, so we can export. If we went through that entire process and we just had the informational items, Caseware wouldn't even show us them on screen. So it would just completely skip past this window and go all the way through to that final diagnostics that we run, that final submission process that we saw. So it will just completely go, okay, everything's fine with that diagnostics. We are going to just skip past and continue to the next section.
While this is running, Phil, we've got a couple more questions that have come in. So there's one that says, often when we export from Caseware, there is no error. However, when the file gets uploaded to HMRC and it comes back with an error, why is that? It's so basically Caseware is not catching the error in theory, and HMRC is saying that there's an issue with the file. Why could that be?
I'm not sure. It could be that the HMRC, so it could be that Caseware has tags that it expects to see, the mandatory ones, the ones in relation to dates and signatures. But if you don't tag, for example, the controlling party note within Caseware isn't going to flag up when you go through and you generate iXBRL that the controlling party table isn't tagged. But HMRC may flag up that you've got a controlling party note, but it's not been tagged. So it could be an instance like that. It could be that And the main reason why Caseware won't flag that up is because it's essentially a custom note. It's a table note that you guys can populate with whatever information that you want.
Yeah, no problem.
So yeah, we can, if you've got examples, we can have a look at those.
Yeah. It might also come back to, you know, the taking the updates as well, and making sure that you pick them on the KL update menu. And like you said, the only other thing that I could think of is any kind of full customizations where you've removed sales potentially, or replaced a default note with your own one. So in theory, you take the responsibility to replicate the same tags across.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll
exactly.
save the rest of the questions for the Q&A section. I'll let you just crack on with this.
No, that's fine. So yeah, just quickly, just another example, or an example of another error message that we have placed into here. It's the name or description of related party, if not defined by another tag entity controlled by key management personnel too. So we're missing a tag. And the reason for that is that when we've gone through and we've done the related party transactions, we've tagged this first paragraph as our key management personnel number 1. We've tagged the majority of the second paragraph as key management personnel 2, except for the name, which you've accidentally tagged as key management personnel 3. So if I go to tools, I go to iXBRL and I go to tags, and I just load that in from this screen. I click OK. Again, so here we've got key management personnel 1, key management personnel 1, key management personnel 1. So this is all fine. And the reason why it's fine is because Caseware is able to distinguish who that key management personnel or who that or what that entity is, what their name is, because we've tagged it accordingly. Now, if we go down to the second paragraph, key management personnel 2, key management personnel 2, key management personnel, key management personnel 2. But if I go to simply software, this is tagged as key management personnel 3. Now, I've gone through and obviously done this on purpose as an issue, but it is something that crops up. If someone selects the wrong key management personnel, then and it doesn't have a name that associates all of these balances, you will get that warning message pop up. So just come back out of the screen, make sure that you select the right key management personnel number, so 2 for the second transactions, and that will then allow us to generate the iXBRL with no issues. So I'm aware that I don't want to run out too time, so I want to get into the questions that you've got, James. So I'll invite you to return.
No problem. Yeah, okay. So we've got quite a few questions in. If we can't answer all of them, we'll put together a document at the end. The next question on the list here is we always file with HMRC and always without a DPL, even if the accounts have a DPL. On the completion screen, if the accounts do not have a DPL, do we select the client retention or filing with regulatory bodies? And if the accounts do not have a DPL, same question. So what would be the completion screen setup for a file that does and doesn't have a DPL? I understand it's a question.
So there. If it hasn't got a DPL, then you can select filing with regulatory bodies. If you've got a DPL and you're not including it, then you can select file with regulatory bodies.
Yeah.
The main reason why that option is there is more for company's house filing. So if you've got the DPL in the file, it turns it off, or hide. It doesn't turn it off as such; it hides it. So if I just quickly show you on this file. So if I go to Wizard, I go to completion. You can see it's got a DPL in there. If I go to completion and I go to the Wizard section, the completion section of the Wizard, probably should have done it in the other file. It would have been quicker because I already had the Wizard open. There we go. So yeah, if I go into the Wizard on here and I go filing regulatory bodies, click OK and go to the accounts. What it will do at the bottom of the accounts is that, as you can see, it will skip the detailed profit and loss account. So if you're not including and you don't want to include the detailed profit and loss account in the submission, then select that option, regardless of who you're filing with. But if you're filing with company's house, then you have to select that you're filing with regulatory bodies, which will always turn off that detailed profit and loss account.
No problem. Perfect.
If you leave it as file client retention, then it will leave that detail profit and loss account turned on.
Wonderful. The next question we've got here is the client says they have issues tagging the controlling party notes. They followed the right steps using the right dimensions, but still get an error. This is only happening on 2 company stats accounts, but not on the others that they've tagged. Why could that be? It might even be a question for support, to be perfectly honest, if it's a unique case to 2 sets of accounts.
I was about to say, if you send us an example or send our support team, then we'll be able to have a look at it. If it's just on 2 sets, then it could be anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, but without me seeing it, I wouldn't be able to comment exactly on what that was. I just see one of the comments was to do with enable editing, not being able to change cells and being available.
Yes.
That's from if you go on to if you speak to a super user at the firm, they should be able to give you the password for enable editing. It is password protected. You didn't see me put a password in because I've unlocked it on my machine, but it is password protected. Unfortunately, we can't give it out to you on this webinar, but there should be someone in your firm who knows that password. And if not, then get in touch.
No problem. The next question is it a requirement with HMRC now to have tagged text within your controlling parties note? We manually type the note in at the moment, and we don't tag anything.
It's a good question. It's a requirement. If I click on this message here, click to if your entity is part of a group, you must manually apply additional tags for any items. The main reason we've included this is because we were getting feedback from HMRC, and certain clients of ours were getting feedback from HMRC where they weren't tagging these areas, and HMRC was saying, "Oh, we were expecting to see tags on the controlling party note." So that's more of a warning message to say, look, if you've got controlling parties, you should be tagging it. So we can only base it on that assumption that we've been given. We would assume that it is required, but that'd be something for HMRC rather than to bring up with. Obviously, Caseware won't automatically tag it because it's just a text section, and it's actually certain piece of information that you need to tag within that note rather than the whole note itself.
No problem. Next question we have here, it's we have errors like that where the text is tagged twice, but it's not picked up as a difference. Not quite sure. So it sounds like the tags being so the text is tagged twice, but it's not popping up as an error. Yet it is an error on HMRC, so it's a similar thing as to Caseware not picking it up. Apparently, text being tagged twice.
Yeah, would need to see an example of it.
Yeah, it
depends what
like
it's tagged. Because you can tag. So, for example, with the related party transaction note, I can tag that entire paragraph and tag cells within inside of that. You shouldn't be able to apply 2 tags to the same piece of text, because it should prompt you and say, actually, you've already applied a tag to this piece of text. So yeah, if you want to get in touch and just drop us an example of that, we can ask our guys to investigate that.
No problem. Okay, a couple more left. We've got our external auditors HMRC submission is returning an error message with the iXBRL files generated by Caseware. When it passes all the checks within Caseware, how can we resolve this? So I think it's a similar kind of question there, where Caseware is saying that it's all okay, but it's getting sent back from HMRC.
Yeah. Again, could be updates. It could be that, as I've already mentioned, Caseware only checks for the tags that are available, or checks the mandatory tags that are included. So, for example, if I just as a wild example, if I removed all the tags if I went to the creditors note and I removed a tag from this other creditors line, Caseware wouldn't prompt you and say there's an error. It just wouldn't export that tag because you've chosen to remove that tag. So, but HMRC or Companies House may prompt an error to say, actually, you're missing certain piece of information, or you've got that line, but you haven't got a tag applied to it. So it could be something like that, again, without us looking at it in an example. If you want to send us an example, then please let us know.
No problem. We've got another one here. If you select filing with regulatory bodies, it can change the auditor fee note on the audited sets, so the larger sets of accounts. Why is that? So the auditor fee note is being changed when you change the regulatory body option.
Sounds like an issue that we'll need to investigate.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, there are just a couple more coming in. People saying they're having a similar issue there, and you need to send it in as a zip file. So give that one a go. Thank you everyone for contributing that. It's good.
You can tell that me and James don't actually do the submissions.
No problem. Yeah, that kind of rounds us off for questions at the moment. So if we want to go through the kind of round up slides there. Thank you everyone for your questions today. It's been good to go through them all. Just a quick reminder for the upcoming webinars, check them out at the caseware.co.uk/events page there. That's not just webinars, it's any events that Caseware is involved in as well. So you can check out anything there. Perfect. Next screen there. Wonderful. Quick reminder on the front of social media and YouTube. So we've got a LinkedIn page. It's a client services Caseware page. So it's more specifically aimed at education and media. So you don't get bombarded with all the sales talk on the main page. You can just subscribe and follow to that one. And we pop up posts about upcoming webinars, so you won't miss out on anything there. As well as subscribing to our YouTube channel, we post all the quick vid content and everything, every webinar recording on there as well. So if you need to access them after this point, then obviously you can look on the KB and you can look on the YouTube channel as well. Perfect. Yeah, just a quick reminder on the KB there. If you need any assistance with any of your questions, you can pop them on the KB, and there is a live chat feature there as well in the bottom right. Perfect. Well, that rounds everything up for today. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you in the next one.
1 second, James.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to jump in impromptu at the end of the webinar. I just had a quick question come in. Someone asked, when we tag micro accounts for a company's house, we often get a message saying the average number of employees has not been tagged. Just something to look out for anyone who does file micro accounts with HMRC or company's house. If you haven't got any of these, so again, Caseware by default will only export balances that have actually or that aren't zero. So if you've got no employees, then what you might want to do when you're going through and exporting this information is to generate the iXBRL. And otherwise you may get an error message to say that that tag is missing. So just quickly, when you go through and generate that, just select this option here to export numeric items with zero balances. And that'll export the average number of employees as well. But yeah, that question came in. I thought it useful one just to answer. But yeah, thank you guys for your
wonderful. Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, we'll see you in the next webinar.
On the next webinar. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Bye bye.